I'll be your substitute teacher for the day. So we're just going to put a movie on here and have a nice chill time together. Thank you. You didn't have a choice in that, by the way.
My brain wants simplicity. I'll always be stuck doing what comes easily. I'll never be as good as the people who did this before me.
I fell in love with lettering and design early through candy packaging and old advertising graphics. As a kid growing up in the suburbs, life could be boring from day to day, but the neighborhood convenience store offered a little window into another world. Staring at candy packaging in the 90s sent my imagination flying. The bright colors, animated lettering, and characters were sensational and exciting and connected with me instantly. Each product had its own personality, and as a viewer, it allowed you to connect on an emotional level. Seeing work like this felt like what I was meant to do, but I had a long road to get there. As a kid with ADD, it made it almost impossible to do well at anything that didn't really grab me. I seemed to only have two modes. I could lock in and hyper-focus on something I enjoyed for hours, or I would have no concentration at all. With things like skateboarding and graffiti, I became completely obsessed. With things like math class, you couldn't pay me enough to pay attention. And all my report cards said the same thing. Shows great potential, but lacking in focus. Having an ADD brain is kind of a gift and a curse, but before you learn how to manage it, it's mostly just a curse. It's like having thoughts made out of golden retriever puppies. They're so wonderful and cute, but trying to get any of them to sit still long enough to do exactly what you need is almost impossible. Puppy attack indeed. An overactive mind will generate lots of good ideas, but it can also turn on itself easily. If you're struggling with something like long division, an ADD brain can find all kinds of negative messages to pile on, overwhelm you, and prevent you from solving your problems. Suddenly, the well-organized wiring in your mind begins to feel like the tangled mess of cords behind your parents' desktop computer. It's exhausting because you go around and around in circles. It's confusing because you can't figure out exactly what's wrong with you. It's heartbreaking because you can't achieve the things that you want to. By the time I made it to high school, it was becoming obvious that a traditional route wasn't really going to work for me. It came to a head when I was asked to solve a math problem in front of the class. It was obvious I didn't know where to begin, as my face became red and I stuttered through some guesses. The teacher stopped me mid-sentence and said, "What are you going to do for the rest of your life, Luke? Skateboard?" I said, "Hopefully." I never liked math anyway, and so I dropped out for good and leaned into the one thing that was providing a glimmer of hope: art class. I had zero technical skills, and I couldn't draw, but my teacher saw that my ideas were always pretty good. He recommended that I try to apply to art school at NSCAD in Halifax. My application to art school was rejected, but through some summer classes and a sympathetic professor, they fudged the records to sneak me in. That is a true story, by the way. I had no sense of direction and very little actual skill, but I loved the look of old lettering and illustration, and I wanted to follow that passion if I could. I tried explaining my interest to design professors, hoping for guidance, but they looked at me like I was crazy. These teachers had no imagination and a very narrow idea of what graphic design could or should look like. This was very much the Helvetica era, and most designers didn't illustrate or really do much of anything by hand. No disrespect to Helvetica. I'm a fan. I knew that my vision was a little bit unconventional, but in my mind it made sense. Luckily, there was one teacher who also saw things differently. I didn't know it at the time, but enrolling in Rod McDonald's typography class would change the course of my life. Rod McDonald is arguably Canada's most accomplished font designer of all time and was teaching at NSCAD during my time there. Seriously, folks, I encourage you to look up Rod McDonald. When we met, I explained to him that I'm interested in hand lettering and sign painting, but I don't know much about it, and I don't know how it could figure into my work. He told me, I was a sign painter and lettering artist for most of my youth. Why don't you come over to my house, I'll show you some books, and we can talk more. I had been fumbling through the darkness, and Rod turned the light on for me. It was such a relief to meet a teacher who understood my interests and saw the same value in them that I did. I felt like I was on the right path and just had to keep going. We began a mentorship that is still active today.
You son of a bitch.
That's me on the right. When I began as a freelance designer in 2013, I tried to incorporate lettering at any chance I could. I love the freedom of expression that lettering offers. Every font communicates a message in a specific voice, but sometimes you can't find the right voice in a pre-existing font. Being able to draw letters and logos yourself allows you to tailor exactly how that voice feels and express your idea more accurately. I was always drawn to script lettering. I loved how versatile they could be and how a script can represent something very casual or something delicate, depending on how you draw it. There was one style of script that was more complex and beautiful than the rest: the Spencerian script. Spencerian scripts feature high contrast lines that swell from heavy strokes into hairlines, and flourishes that swirl and dance around the lettering. They were the peak of sophistication and beauty, and often incredibly complex. Here's a great example by Rod McDonald from 1985. This one says, "Joy." In the 1970s, artists Tom Carnesi and Tony DeSpina would push the craft of lettering to all new heights. Working under creative director Herb Lubalin, Tom and Tony would produce iconic typefaces, logos, graphics, and packaging for the biggest brands in the world. It was hard to believe anyone could do the things that they did by hand. Their work spoke to me because they looked at typography as something totally malleable instead of something static. They looked at letters and copy as pieces of clay, and they were master sculptors. Everything was able to be rewritten, redrawn, or redesigned entirely to suit the message at hand. Although they worked in many different styles, it was their dazzling script lettering that set them apart from their peers. Cool, no? Black Sabbath sounds great on these speakers. When Rod and I started working together, he made it very clear that these were two of the greatest lettering artists who ever lived. They were his heroes, and so by default, they became mine as well. Looking through these examples of Tom and Tony's ornate scripts, I imagined what it would be like to create one of my own. But with an ADD brain that couldn't sit still and focus, I believed it just wasn't possible for me, and I told myself that. But Rod was always pushing me further, and so with some doubts, I set out on my quest to design a real Spencerian script. It was an uphill battle all the way, and I made every mistake possible. I just couldn't see what I was doing wrong. It brought back the same feelings of struggling trying to learn things as a kid. Just like sitting in math class, the negative thoughts started to pile up and run through my mind over and over again.
My brain wants simplicity. I'll always be stuck doing what comes easily. I'll never be as good as the people who did this before me.
But with patience and guidance from Rod and many, many drafts, I slowly began to understand the principles of a script and how mine didn't quite line up. A good Spencerian script requires an incredible amount of effort, but it should look effortless. Each curve has to be smooth. Each flourish has to extend naturally from your letters, and the whole composition has to balance together. If one area is too heavy or too busy, your eye is always drawn there, and it loses balance. After a lot of failure, I had something that looked like the real thing. I couldn't believe it. I felt like I had broken through a barrier and done something that seemed completely impossible. That spring, I had a trip to California planned, and I decided to take a chance. I sent an email to the address listed on Tom Carnesi's website, explaining that I was a young designer and a big fan, and I asked him if he had time for a meeting. I was sure that it would probably lead nowhere, but to my surprise, my phone rang later that night with the name Thomas Carnesi on the caller ID. I couldn't believe I was having a conversation with this person I idolized. He was retired from work, but living in Palm Springs. We chatted and got to know each other a little bit, and he seemed happy to meet. I was thrilled. I knew that if anyone was able to weigh in on my work, it would be him. So I brought my shiny new script with me to show off and get the final stamp of approval that I had completed my training. I drove to the desert and waited for Tom. I was nervous but excited to meet a real design legend. I had heard a couple stories that Tom was all business and could be a little bit of a rough character, but I assumed he had probably mellowed with age. This was not the case. Our meeting was a disaster. Thank you. We talked at length with me excitedly asking him questions about work in the 70s. He seemed to want to put it all behind him like a bad memory. I was confused because this is someone who had contributed so much iconic work to the world. He had a career anyone would be envious of. If there was a Design Hall of Fame, he would be in it. He was incredibly negative about modern graphic design and the way he felt he had been shortchanged throughout his career. He asked me why he wasn't being offered six-figure price tags to speak at design colleges. He brought me to his house, but explained that he couldn't let me inside because I might steal the valuable art up on the walls. When I showed him my script, he said, "You know, you can't make a career out of copying me," pointed out some flaws, and moved on. When I showed him other work, he either didn't understand it or didn't seem to like it, or both. When we parted ways, he lightened up, and he thanked me for my interest in his work. Despite the way our conversation had went, I could tell that he still felt grateful that someone cared enough to come all that way to meet him. He handed me an 8.5 by 11 piece of paper with no explanation that read, "Acquiring more technical expertise never results in the unveiling of the soul." We said goodbye to each other. I thought more about the message on the page. Tom was an artist of the highest caliber of technical expertise. Was he denouncing his own approach to work? Or maybe it was a cautionary message about the use of computers versus hand-drawn artwork. I still have no idea what it means. After that meeting, I felt lost. Not only was I not as far along as I thought, but my meeting with this artist that I idolized had gone much differently than I imagined. I went back to Canada with my tail between my legs. Tom's negativity was infectious. When I began work again, I told myself the same things over and over.
My brain wants simplicity. I'll always be stuck doing what comes easily. I'll never be as good as the people who did this before me.
I was caught in this incredibly cruel way of talking to myself, and while it had been a motivating factor for me at times in the past, it began to get out of control. I started to feel it creeping in all the time. I may not have been a master of lettering, but I was definitely a master of telling myself how bad I sucked. I could put a negative spin on anything. You drew a piece of lettering? It'll never be as good as Tom Carnese would do it. You did a workout this morning? You didn't do enough push-ups. You updated your portfolio? You should have done that a year ago. It would be funny if it wasn't so crippling. David Lynch once said that the idea of the brilliant, starving artist is a bullshit one that we need to stop romanticizing, and this has always resonated with me. Although adversity and suffering can inspire great work, the truth is that if someone has too much suffering in their life, they won't be much good to anyone. Still feeling disappointed about the way my meeting had gone, I spoke with my friend Patrick Griffin, and I told him my story. He framed things in a completely different way. When I complained that these artists did these beautiful scripts by hand, he reminded me that it is also extremely hard and clunky to draw swirling fine lines with a computer, and that although it is different from how it was done in the past, it's still a great accomplishment. When I explained that this artist I admired didn't seem to like or understand what I was doing, he said, "Well, Luke, that's a 75-year-old man." And in my opinion, he shouldn't like all the work you're doing because you are working in a different era with different ideas. I had been so busy listening to my crappy inner monologue that I couldn't get outside of myself and shift my thinking. But when I heard it put this way from someone I respected and trusted, something flipped. I began to pay closer attention to my mood and my attitude from day to day. I realized that whether I was having a good day or a terrible day, most times my circumstances were exactly the same. The only difference was me and my perspective. It was obvious that there were big problems with my outlook. I realized that if I didn't start pushing back on the ideas in my mind, that they were going to swallow me whole. This began the long process of trying to be kinder to myself and more positive about my work. And with time, I could see that I had actually made a lot more progress than I believed. My eye had really developed through working on the Spencerian script, and the skills and attention to detail I gained were applicable to all kinds of projects. When I was asked to design the branding for a French restaurant called Gitane, I knew that it had to be great. Even though it had to be more formal looking than a lot of my other work, working on the Spencerian gave me the confidence that I could pull something like that off. With that in my God love you. With that in my mind and some positive reinforcement, I started on a new kind of script. It took a lot of drafts, but thinking back to the Spencerian, I reminded myself that that's part of the process to go somewhere that you haven't been before. By the time I was done, I had created something that I thought felt perfect for the assignment. The success of this project led to a full-time position with the restaurant group. During my time with the company, I got to create the look for numerous brands, and I took advantage of the total creative freedom offered there. My work started to blossom as the imagination that was always there was met with more technical skill, and this opened up a lot more possibilities. Thank you. Looking at it now, I know that I couldn't have done this without going on that quest to unlock the Spencerian script and confront my own skewed ideas about myself. I couldn't have accessed any of these things had I continued working and thinking in the same ways. Although I cherish the lessons learned from going through these experiences, I sometimes wish that someone had just sat me down a lot earlier in life and drilled it into my head. So, I'd like to try to do that for you now. Be honest with yourself when something can be better, but give yourself credit when you get something right. Setting a high standard for your work is necessary to make progress, but it's a delicate balance. It can't be all praise, but it can't be all criticism either. When you compare yourself to others, you run the risk of devaluing the things that are special about yourself. Proceed with caution. Follow what excites you. Working hard is so much easier when you enjoy what you're doing. If you have an idea that you love that is beyond your current skill set, allow that to be the driver for progress. You will find that a lot of the most rewarding work is just beyond that barrier of discomfort. Thank you.